I never gave the baby a name out loud, but Vanessa did, right there in front of the caterers, the string lights, and my own son. "Relax, Daniel," she said, laughing like it was nothing. "It's not like this baby's ever going to need you the way Ethan does." The patio went quiet, the way a boat goes quiet right before the engine dies. Not silence exactly, just the hum of the string lights buzzing overhead. Ice cubes settling in someone's glass, nobody's fork touching a plate. My own sister-in-law froze mid-pour, wine bottle tipped and forgotten. For one long second, I felt exactly like a hull I'd once surveyed off Solomon's Island, sound on the outside, rotted clean through underneath, and nobody had bothered to check until it was taking on water. This is the part where, if you've watched enough of these stories, you already know the drill. I built something. Somebody wanted it. And by the end, somebody paid a price they didn't see coming. I'm not going to pretend that's not exactly what happened here, but I'd rather you hear it the way I lived it, slow and true, because the truth of it took me almost a year to see clearly, and I'm still not sure I've forgiven myself for taking that long. My name is Daniel Hartley. I'm 54 years old, and for 26 years I've made my living as a marine surveyor on the Chesapeake, the man boat buyers hire before they hand over a check, the man who climbs into bilges with a flashlight and an ice pick and tells people the truth about what they're about to own. I've turned down commissions worth thousands of dollars because I wouldn't sign off on a hull I didn't trust. That's not modesty, that's just what the job requires. A surveyor who lies for money doesn't stay a surveyor for long, he just stops getting hired one quiet phone call at a time, until the whole bay knows not to trust him. People think a boat surveyor spends his life admiring yachts. Mostly I spend it in engine rooms that smell like diesel and mildew, on my knees with a moisture meter, telling some retiree his dream boat has core rot behind a perfect-looking gel coat finish. You learn something doing that for a quarter century. You learn that the things most likely to sink you are never the things advertised on the outside. The paint job isn't the problem. It's always what's underneath the paint job. I'm telling you that now because it matters later. Hold on to it. Before any of this, before Vanessa, there was Margaret, my wife of 22 years, mother to our son Ethan, and the only woman I ever expected to grow old with. Meg's family had built a modest shipping and marine supply business up in Baltimore over 3 generations, the kind of quiet money that doesn't show up in a big house but shows up in an account nobody talks about at dinner. When her father passed, some of that came to her, and when the cancer took Meg 8 years ago, ovarian diagnosed too late, gone in 11 months, she made sure it would come to Ethan, not to me outright. To Ethan in a trust, with me as trustee until he turned 30 or married, whichever came first. She wasn't distrustful of me. She just knew her son, and she knew grief does strange things to families, and she wanted him protected no matter what came after her. I didn't argue. I signed the paperwork sitting beside her hospital bed with a pen that shook worse than her hands did by then. $3.2 million, give or take market swings, sitting in trust for a boy who was 19 years old and burying his mother. For 6 years after Meg died, I didn't look at another woman. I raised Ethan the best a grieving, half-broken man can raise a 20-year-old. Badly some days, adequately most days, and I kept surveying boats because it was the only thing that still made sense to me. You put your hands on something solid. You tell the truth about what you find, you go home. Grief doesn't survive a strict schedule very well. Mine mostly obeyed it anyway. Then I met Vanessa Cole at a boat show in Annapolis, of all places, standing at a broker's booth in a blazer too expensive for the tent she was standing in, laughing at something that wasn't especially funny. She was 32 then. I was 52. I told myself the age gap didn't matter, that grief had made me older than my years and joy. When it showed up again, didn't need to apologize for its timing. She was sharp and funny in a way that caught me off guard, and for the first time since Meg's funeral, I laughed without feeling guilty about it 5 minutes later. I married her 14 months after we met. Ethan stood up for me at the courthouse, 25 years old by then, dockhand at the marina I part-owned, quiet the way I am quiet, watching his new stepmother, with an expression I mistook for shyness. I understand now it wasn't shyness. It was the same instinct I use on a hull, The part of you that notices the surface doesn't quite match what's underneath, and doesn't yet have the words to say so. The first 2 years were fine. Better than fine, some stretches. I want to be honest about that, because it's easy to tell these stories like the warning signs were flashing red the whole time, and that's not true to how it actually felt living inside it. Vanessa could be genuinely warm. She learned to make Meg's crab cake recipe from an old recipe card I still had, got the Old Bay ratio wrong the first 4 times, and laughed about it instead of getting frustrated. She came to the boatyard sometimes and brought coffee for the crew without being asked. Small things. The kind of things that make a lonely man stop asking harder questions. The cracks started small too, the way Rod always does. She'd mention, casually, how strange it was that all that money sat locked up for Ethan while we lived, in her words. Like normal people in the house I'd owned outright since before I met her. I told her that was Meg's wish and I wasn't going to argue with a dead woman's dying request. Vanessa would nod, drop it, bring it up again 3 weeks later from a slightly different angle. Nothing dramatic, just a current pulling steady in one direction. At our second anniversary dinner, she raised her glass and said, half joking, to Daniel, who trusts everybody except his own wife with money. Everyone at the table laughed. I laughed too, a beat too late. The way you laugh at something that lands somewhere it shouldn't. I want to tell you when I first felt something was genuinely wrong, and I can actually point to the exact evening. It was a Tuesday in late September, 7 months before the pregnancy announcement I'm about to tell you about. Vanessa was on a video call in the guest bedroom, with the door mostly closed, and I heard her say a name I didn't recognize, Marcus, in a tone she never used with me anymore, low and familiar and a little bit hungry. He'll never see it coming, she said, and laughed, soft, private. Then she noticed the floorboard creak under my weight in the hallway, and the call ended fast, mid-sentence. I asked her about it at dinner. She said Marcus was an old college friend, helping her with some financial planning ideas for the house. I let it go. I'm not proud of that. 26 years of reading hulls for a living, and I let my own wife's story slide past me without a second inspection, because some part of me still needed the surface to hold. I didn't know it yet, but that phone call was the first plank giving way beneath the floor I'd trusted for 2 years. 3 months later, on a Sunday morning in December with frost still on the marina's dock lines, Vanessa came downstairs holding a small white stick with 2 pink lines and told me she was pregnant. I want you to understand what that news did to a 54-year-old man who'd buried his first wife and quietly, privately, assumed his chance at more children had passed with her. I sat down at the kitchen table so hard the chair legs scraped the floor. I put my face in my hands. I cried, actually cried, the kind of crying I hadn't done since Meg's funeral. And Vanessa wrapped her arms around my shoulders and said, "See, I told you good things still happen to you." And in that moment I believed every word of it. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to spend the next 6 months building a nursery for a child who would never be born, and I was going to do it with my own 2 hands in the same garage workshop where I'd once built Ethan's crib 27 years earlier. Ethan's reaction was more complicated, and I noticed it even through my own joy. He hugged me, said the right things, told me he was happy for me. And something in his eyes stayed guarded the whole time, the way it had stayed guarded at the courthouse 2 years before. Later, I'd learn Ethan had his own reasons to stay quiet that had nothing to do with jealousy over a sibling. But that December morning, I read his silence as a grown son adjusting to strange news, nothing more. I didn't push. That was my second mistake, and it cost more than the first one did. The lawyer's office visit came 2 weeks after the pregnancy announcement. And this is the part where the financial current Vanessa had been steering for 2 years finally surfaced, where I could see it clearly if I'd been looking hard enough. Our estate attorney, a careful, silver-haired man named Foster Adams, who'd handled Meg's trust documents personally, sat across from us and explained, in the dry, careful language lawyers use, that Meg's trust language defined Ethan's eventual full inheritance as contingent on him being my sole surviving child at the time of distribution. A second child, my child with Vanessa, would trigger a redivision clause buried in paragraph 14 of a document I hadn't reread carefully in 8 years. Half to Ethan, half to the new baby, held in trust, managed by a court-appointed guardian until the child turned 18. I remember Vanessa's hand tightening very slightly around mine under the table when Adam said the word guardian. I remember thinking at the time that it was excitement. I understand now it was something closer to satisfaction. Who would the guardian typically be? Vanessa asked, in a voice so carefully casual it should have set off every alarm I owned, in a situation like ours. Adam said, in cases like this, it was common for the surviving parent, meaning me, or in an unusual circumstance, the child's other parent, to petition for guardianship of the financial trust, subject to court approval and, often, professional co-management. I didn't know it yet. But somewhere in a downtown Baltimore law office 3 weeks earlier, a trust and estates attorney named Marcus Reed had already drafted the outline of exactly that petition, built around a pregnancy that, on the December morning Vanessa cried in my kitchen holding a plastic test stick, did not actually exist. I want to slow down here, because this is the part of the story where I owe you the whole truth about myself too, not just about her. I told you earlier that a boat surveyor learns to distrust the paint job. I want to tell you something else my job teaches you, something I don't say out loud very often. Sometimes you crawl into a bilge, and every instrument you own tells you the wood is soft, and you still climb back out and tell the owner the boat's sound, because you want it to be sound so badly that you stop trusting your own hands. I did that with Vanessa for the better part of a year. Every instinct I'd built over 26 years of professional distrust, I set down at my own front door because a lonely widower wanted more than he wanted the truth, to believe he'd been given a second chance at a family. That's not a flaw I'm proud of, but I think it's an honest one, and I think it's the reason this story took as long as it did to come apart. The pregnancy moved forward through January and into February the way pregnancies do in the world most people know, except, looking back now with everything I eventually learned, almost nothing about it moved the way real pregnancies actually move. Vanessa was sick exactly twice in the first trimester. Both times conveniently in the mornings I was already leaving for early surveys, gone by the time I got back. She skipped the first ultrasound appointment, citing a scheduling conflict at the boutique interior design firm where she worked 3 days a week, and rescheduled it for a date I happened to be out on the water, surveying a sport fisher near Cambridge, 40 minutes each way. She came home that evening with a grainy black and white photo she said the clinic had printed for her, a smudge of gray she pointed to and called the head, and I taped it to the refrigerator with the same trembling hands I'd used to sign Meg's trust documents 8 years earlier. I didn't know it yet, but that photograph had never come from any ultrasound machine that had ever touched Vanessa Cole's body. By March, she was, by her own report, 14 weeks along, and she began wearing looser clothes around the house, one hand resting on her lower stomach in a gesture I found unbearably tender at the time. I bought a crib kit, real cherry wood, nothing prefabricated, and started building it in the garage on weekends. The same garage where Meg and I had painted a mural of sailboats on Ethan's nursery wall almost 3 decades before. Vanessa picked the paint color for the new nursery, a pale sage green, and stood in the doorway one Saturday afternoon watching me roll the first coat onto drywall, arms crossed, smiling in a way I read as happiness. I didn't know it yet, but I was painting a room for a child who would never need it, funded in part by money that was never supposed to leave Ethan's trust at all, and somewhere in that same house, in a shoebox at the back of her closet I would not find for another 4 months, Vanessa was keeping something small and silicone and shaped exactly like a growing belly, still in its original padded shipping box from a company that specialized, according to its own website, in discreet pregnancy prosthetics for stage, screen, and personal use. I want to tell you I caught it faster than I did. I want to tell you the surveyor in me woke up sooner. He didn't. It took my son's silence breaking, a doctor's carefully worded phone call, and one object I found by accident on a rainy Thursday in July, an object I'll get to, because it changes everything about how this story ends, before I finally understood that the woman sleeping beside me every night had built her entire pregnancy. The same way a bad marine dealer builds a boat he knows won't survive open water. Pretty enough on the surface not to pass a casual look, and never meant to be surveyed closely by someone who actually knew what he was looking for. That's where I have to leave it for now. But I promise you this, before this story ends, a doctor is going to turn a screen toward me in an office with the door closed, and everything I thought I understood about my own house is going to come apart in about 4 seconds flat. And what happens after that? At a baby shower with 60 of our closest friends standing on my own back lawn, is something none of them, not Vanessa, not Marcus, not even my own son, ever saw coming. I didn't know it yet. But the first real crack in Vanessa's story didn't come from me at all. It came from my son, and it came out of him sideways, the way truth tends to leak out of people who've been carrying something too heavy for too long. It was late April, so Sunday 2 days after I'd finished the crib. Ethan came by the house to help me hang shelving in the new nursery, and somewhere around the 3rd hour, both of us up to our elbows in drywall anchors. He went quiet in a way that wasn't his usual quiet. I know my son's silences the way I know a hull. There's the ordinary kind, and there's the kind with something taking on water underneath it. "You okay?" I asked him. He didn't answer right away. He set down the drill, wiped his palms on his jeans, and said, "Dad, can I tell you something? And you not get mad at me for not saying it sooner?" I told him he could tell me anything. I meant it. I still believe I meant it, even though what happened next tested that more than almost anything in my life has. "Vanessa asked me for money in February," he said. "Not a lot, $600. Said it was for a specialist copay. The insurance wasn't covering yet, some high-risk OB thing, and she asked me not to mention it to you because she didn't want you stressing about money on top of everything." I gave it to her. I didn't think about it again until last week, when I saw the invoice from that same specialist office sitting on the kitchen counter, and it was dated 3 weeks before she ever asked me for anything. I felt something in my chest go still and cold. The exact stillness I feel in the first 2 seconds after a moisture meter needle jumps somewhere it shouldn't on a hull I was hoping would read clean. "Why didn't you say something?" Ethan's jaw worked for a second before the words came out. "Because I didn't want to be the guy who ruins his dad's second chance over a paperwork date that's probably nothing. Because I remember what you looked like the year after Mom died, and I wasn't going to be the reason that came back if I was wrong." He looked at me then, really looked, 27 years old, and carrying something that had clearly been sitting on him for months. And because some part of me has been scared this whole pregnancy since December, and I hated myself for thinking it, so I just stayed quiet. "I'm sorry, Dad. I should have said something the day I noticed the date. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't gratitude, not yet. It was closer to anger, not at Ethan, but at the situation, at myself. At a year of my own willful blindness suddenly reflected back at me through my son's guilty face. I told him it wasn't his fault. I'm not sure either of us fully believed me. We finished the shelving in near silence, and when he left that evening, he hugged me at the door. Something Ethan and I have never been especially good at. Two quiet men who show love through fixing things rather than saying things. And he held on a beat longer than usual, like he was trying to apologize with his arms instead of his mouth. I held on just as long. Neither of us said anything else about Vanessa that night. We didn't need to. I didn't know it yet, but that $600 invoice, sitting 3 weeks ahead of when Vanessa claimed to need it, was the first small plank of a much larger lie I was about to spend the next 10 weeks quietly, methodically surveying, because that's the only way I know how to find the truth about anything, slowly, carefully, with my hands, not just my eyes. I didn't confront her that week. I want you to understand why, because I think it matters more than the confrontation itself eventually did. 26 years of surveying boats teaches you something specific about accusations. You never tell an owner his hull is rotten based on one soft spot. You check the whole boat, systematically, before you write a single word in the report, because a man's entire understanding of what he owns is about to change based on what you tell him, and he deserves the full truth, not a half-formed suspicion dressed up as certainty. So I started surveying my own marriage the same way I'd survey a 42-foot trawler with a soft transom. Quietly, patiently, without letting the owner, in this case myself, and eventually Vanessa, see the flashlight moving yet. I began noticing things I'd let slide past me for months. Vanessa's stomach, by late April, should have been visibly rounding under normal clothes at roughly 20 weeks along. It was, but only when she wanted it to be. I caught her twice, once stepping out of the shower and once changing for bed, where the curve I'd grown used to seeing under her blouses seemed to have simply relocated, higher one week, lower the next, softer some nights than others, in a way that didn't track with anything I remembered from watching Meg carry Ethan almost 3 decades earlier. I told myself bodies are different. I told myself I was a 54-year-old man with no medical training who hadn't been present for a pregnancy since 1998. And what did I actually know about how a woman's body was supposed to change week to week? That excuse held for a while. It held less well every week that passed. I started keeping a small notebook in my truck's glove box, the same kind of notebook I use for survey notes on a hull. Dates, observations, nothing dramatic. Just facts recorded the way I'd record a soft spot on a bulkhead. April 22nd, missed second OB appointment, rescheduled, no new ultrasound photo, produced. May 3rd, overheard phone call, Marcus's name again, laughter, door shut fast when I came upstairs. May 14th, found a receipt in her purse, not searching, it fell out reaching for her keys, for a company called Silhouette Prosthetics, charge of $340, description simply listed as custom order. I photographed that receipt with my phone before putting it back exactly where it had fallen, and I sat in my truck in our own driveway for 11 minutes afterward, before I could make myself go inside and act like nothing had happened. I didn't know it yet, but Silhouette Prosthetics sold, among other things, a line of high-fidelity silicone pregnancy bellies marketed to actresses, to families pursuing surrogacy who wanted to manage privacy, and the fine print didn't say this part, but I'd learn it later from the doctor who eventually became central to this whole story, to people looking to fake a pregnancy entirely, convincingly enough to survive a hug, a hand pressed to the stomach, even a loosely fitted blouse. The confrontation I'd been avoiding almost happened by accident 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening in early June, and it happened over something as small as a comment about her mother-in-law. We were eating dinner, grilled rockfish, something Meg used to make on Thursdays, a small habit I'd carried forward without really noticing, and Vanessa, mid-conversation about nursery colors, said something about how she hoped the baby wouldn't inherit the Hartley stubbornness. God knows one of you was already enough, and then added, almost as an afterthought, your first wife's whole family sounds like they were exhausting. No offense. I set my fork down carefully. You never met Meg's family, I said. You never met Meg. I know, Vanessa said, waving a hand. I just mean, from what you've told me, all that money locked away like it's some kind of religious relic, some dead woman's rules running our whole life 8 years later. It's a little much, Daniel. I'm just saying it out loud. I want to tell you I stayed calm the way I stay calm on a job site when an owner doesn't like what I'm finding in his bilge. I didn't, not entirely. Something in me went very still and very cold. The same stillness I'd feel later on my own back lawn in front of 60 guests, and I said quiet but not gentle, Meg is the reason our son has a future. Don't talk about her like that in my house. Vanessa's face changed for just a second. Not guilt, I understand now, but calculation. A woman recalculating how far she could push a line she'd just discovered was closer than she'd thought. Then she softened her voice, put a hand over the curve of her stomach and said, I'm sorry, hormones. I don't mean it the way it sounds. And because I wanted, more than I wanted the truth, for that explanation to be enough, I let it be enough. I apologized for snapping. We finished dinner. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last dinner I'd eat in that house, believing, even partially, that my marriage was what it appeared to be. The object that finally ended the surveying and started the confirming came 4 weeks later, on a rainy Thursday in mid-July, and I found it entirely by accident, looking for a phone charger in the back of Vanessa's closet while she was at a design client's house across the bay. It was a shoebox, pushed behind a row of winter boots, unremarkable enough that I almost didn't move it. but it was heavier than a shoebox should be, and when I opened it, sitting inside on a bed of tissue paper was a silicone prosthetic belly, warm-toned, disturbingly lifelike, with a set of adjustable straps still folded neatly beside it, and underneath that, a printed invoice from Silhouette Prosthetics dated December 3rd, 3 weeks before Vanessa had ever come downstairs holding a pregnancy test and told me the news that had made me cry at my own kitchen table. I sat down on the floor of our bedroom closet, 54 years old, holding a fake pregnant belly that had apparently existed since before I'd even known my wife might be lying to me, and I did something I hadn't let myself do in 8 years. I cried the way I'd cried the week Meg died. Not composed, not quiet, the kind of crying that comes up from somewhere older than the specific reason for it. I cried for the nursery I'd painted with my own hands. I cried for the crib I'd built out of cherry wood in the same garage where I'd built Ethan's 27 years earlier. And underneath all of it, I cried because some part of me had genuinely believed, for the first time since burying my wife, that life was giving me something back, and instead it had handed me a shoebox with a costume in it. I didn't know it yet, but tucked into the tissue paper at the very bottom of that same box, folded into a small square I almost missed entirely, was something that had nothing to do with the prosthetic at all. A single sheet of stationery, handwriting I didn't recognize, that would turn out to be the single most important object in this entire story, the thing that would finally tell me not just that I was being deceived, but exactly who had built the plan and exactly how far he was willing to let Vanessa fall to protect himself. I photographed the belly. I photographed the invoice. I did not, that night, touch the folded paper at the bottom of the box, because my hands were shaking too badly to trust myself with something that fragile, and some instinct, the same instinct that's kept me from signing off on a boat before I'd finished a full survey, told me I needed to be steadier before I read whatever was written there. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Closet door, boots, tissue paper, all of it undisturbed, the way you'd rearrange a crime scene you weren't yet ready to report. Then I did the only thing that made sense to a man who spends his life reading what's underneath the surface of things. I called Ethan. He came over within 20 minutes, and I told him everything. The receipt, the notebook, the shoebox, all of it laid out on our kitchen table like evidence photographs from a survey report. My son, who had spent 7 months carrying his own quiet guilt about a $600 invoice, sat across from me with his jaw tight and his hands flat on the table, and for a long moment he didn't say anything at all. Then he said, "There's something else you need to know, Dad. And I should have told you the same day I saw that first invoice, and I didn't, and I'm done being quiet about this family." He told me that 3 weeks earlier, dropping off a delivery at the marina office, he'd overheard Vanessa on a call in the parking lot, a call she thought no one could hear over the wind coming off the water. She'd used a name Ethan didn't recognize at first, Marcus, and she'd said, laughing, low and easy, "Relax. Daniel doesn't read fine print, he reads hulls. By the time anyone looks closely at paragraph 14, the guardianship petition's already filed, and it's your name on the co-trustee line, not his." I want to tell you I felt rage in that moment. I did, eventually. But the first thing I felt, sitting at my own kitchen table with my grown son's hand gripping my shoulder, was something closer to the stillness of a diver going down into cold water, a kind of focus that pushes the panic somewhere you can deal with later. 26 years of surveying boats had taught me that once you know exactly where the rot is, the job isn't to panic. The job is to document it completely in writing with photographs before you ever confront the owner with what you found. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to spend the next 6 weeks doing exactly that. Quietly, patiently, with my son beside me instead of shut out of it this time. Building a file thick enough that when I finally opened that folded piece of paper from the bottom of the shoebox, and finally called the one person who could confirm, medically and undeniably, that there was no pregnancy at all, nobody in that house would have anywhere left to hide. That person, it turned out, was a doctor named Priya Bhatt, and the way I found her had almost nothing to do with detective work, and almost everything to do with the same skill I'd built my entire career on. The simple, stubborn habit of checking the paperwork. Nobody else bothers to check twice. I didn't know it yet, but the doctor who would eventually turn a screen toward me in a closed office wasn't someone I'd find through detective work at all. I'd find her the same way I find everything that matters in my line of work, by asking someone who actually knew the water I was sailing into. The morning after Ethan told me what he'd overheard in the marina parking lot, I called Foster Adams, our estate attorney, and asked him carefully, without giving him the full picture yet, to pull the paperwork trail on Vanessa's prenatal care. Insurance claims, provider names, dates of service. It took him 4 days. What came back confirmed something I'd already started to suspect, and still wasn't fully ready to hear. Every single appointment Vanessa claimed to have attended traced back to a small walk-in practice 2 counties over, run by a general practitioner named Dr. Roland Kessler, whose license, according to the Maryland Medical Board's public records, had been suspended for 18 months in 2019 for falsifying patient charts in an unrelated insurance matter. He'd been reinstated technically on a restricted basis. He was not and had never been an obstetrician. He had no ultrasound equipment on record with the state's licensing board, and he had, over 7 months, billed Vanessa's insurance for 4 separate prenatal consultations, each one processed and approved without a single lab result, blood panel, or imaging file attached. I sat with that information for a long time before I told Ethan, not because I doubted it, because some part of me was still hoping there was an innocent explanation for a man with a falsified records history quietly billing my wife's insurance for a pregnancy that had somehow never produced a single piece of medical documentation. There wasn't an innocent explanation. There almost never is once you've checked the paperwork twice. Foster Adams, to his enormous credit, didn't just hand me a file and walk away. He'd known Meg for 20 years before she died, had drafted her trust himself, and when I finally told him the full picture, Marcus, the guardianship petition Ethan overheard, the shoebox, all of it, his face went the particular gray color I imagined mine had gone in my own bedroom closet weeks earlier. You need a real doctor, he told me. Somebody with no connection to any of this. Somebody whose findings could hold up if this ends up in front of a judge. My daughter went through her residency with a maternal fetal specialist in Annapolis. Board-certified, spotless record, does independent consultations. I'll call her myself. That's how I met Dr. Priya Bhatt on a Wednesday afternoon in late July, in a conference room at Foster Adams's office rather than any medical setting at all, because I wanted her hearing this the same careful way I'd want a boat owner to hear a survey report, with the full file laid out first, no surprises sprung on her. No room for anyone to say later that she'd been misled about what she was walking into. Dr. Bhatt was maybe 45, precise in the way good clinicians are precise, and she listened to the entire account. The missing ultrasounds, the invoice dated before the pregnancy announcement, the suspended license, the shoebox, without interrupting once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I've thought about often since. In 18 years of practice, I've seen women fake symptoms for 100 different reasons, most of them sadder than sinister. I've never once seen it built this deliberately, this far in advance, with this much financial architecture underneath it. Mr. Hartley, if what you're describing is accurate, this wasn't a lie that got out of hand. This was a plan with a business model. She agreed to help, on one condition. She wanted to examine Vanessa herself properly with real equipment, before anyone said a single accusatory word out loud, because, she told me plainly, I won't put my name behind a conclusion I haven't confirmed with my own hands, and neither should you, whatever your instincts are telling you. I understood that condition better than she probably realized. It's the exact rule I've built my entire career around. You don't write the report until you've done the survey yourself. The question became how to get Vanessa in front of a legitimate physician without tipping her off that anyone suspected anything. And the answer, when it came, arrived from an unexpected direction. The baby shower itself, which Vanessa had been planning for 6 weeks by then, set for the second Saturday in August, 60 guests on our back lawn overlooking the water, string lights already ordered, a cake tasting already scheduled. It was Ethan's idea, and I want to give him full credit for it. because I don't think I'd have had the stomach to build it myself. Make it a gift, he said. Everybody at these parties does the sentimental gift thing. The 3D ultrasound keepsake, the little video for the baby book. Tell her you arranged a specialist to come do one as a surprise during the party. She can't say no to that in front of 60 people without it looking insane. And if there's nothing there to scan, Dad, she's going to have to either fake her way through an exam by an actual board-certified physician with real equipment, or she's going to have to find some reason to disappear from her own baby shower. I didn't know it yet, but that plan would work almost exactly as Ethan described it. And the part none of us fully anticipated was how many other people's quiet suspicions were about to surface the moment they finally had permission to say them out loud. The weeks between that conference room meeting and the shower itself were the strangest of my life. I went home every night to a wife I now knew, with near total certainty, was lying to me about the single most significant thing a marriage can involve, and I kept building the nursery, kept smiling at her dinner conversation, kept playing a part in my own house the way I imagine an undercover officer plays a part in a life that isn't really his. It cost me something to do that. I want to be honest about that cost, because these stories sometimes make quiet men sound stoic in a way that isn't quite true. There were nights I sat in my truck in the driveway before going inside, hands on the wheel, just breathing, working up whatever it took to walk through my own front door and act like I didn't know what I knew. The folded letter from the bottom of the shoebox I finally read on the 1st of August, 8 days before the shower. Alone in my truck in the marina parking lot after everyone else had gone home for the evening. My hands were steadier by then. I'd had 6 weeks to prepare myself for whatever it said. It was handwriting I now recognized from a signature on emails Foster Adams's investigator had pulled. Marcus reads. It wasn't addressed to Vanessa by name. It didn't need to be. It read, in part, in language I've kept almost word for word in my memory since. You keep saying this is business, and I keep telling myself I believe you, but some nights I think you actually love him a little, the old man, and that scares me more than the guardianship filing does. Don't get soft on me now. We're 11 months from a co-trustee designation worth more than either of us will make in the next decade combined. Wear the belly to the shower. Smile. Let him build the nursery. It makes the eventual custody argument for the trust money stronger if there's documented paternal investment in a pregnancy he believes is real. I love you. Finish this. I sat in that parking lot for a long time after I read it, not because the plan itself surprised me anymore. By August 1st, I'd had 6 weeks to absorb the scale of it. What stopped my breath was the sentence, I think you actually love him a little. Because somewhere underneath 26 years of professional caution, some part of me had still been hoping, right up until I read Marcus Reed's own handwriting confirming otherwise, that whatever else was false about my marriage, some sliver of what Vanessa felt for me had been real. I didn't know it yet, but that letter, folded back into its original square and slipped into a labeled evidence folder, Foster Adams had set up for exactly this purpose, was going to matter more than any invoice or missing ultrasound photo when the moment finally came to lay everything out in front of witnesses. Financial fraud is one thing. A man's own attorney, in his own handwriting, instructing his accomplice to manufacture the appearance of a father's love for a fabricated child in order to strengthen a custody argument over trust money. That's the kind of detail that turns a private betrayal into something a room full of people can't look away from. Renee Cole, Vanessa's older sister, called me 3 days before the shower, and that call is the part of this story I still find myself thinking about most, because it was the first sign that the rot went in only one direction in that family, not both. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, Renee said, her voice tight over the phone. Has Vanessa let you go to a single real doctor's appointment with her? Actually watched a screen, heard a heartbeat? Any of it? I told her the truth. No, not once. Always some scheduling reason, always some excuse. Renee was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that told me she'd been carrying her own version of Ethan's guilt for months. I've had a bad feeling since March. She borrowed $4,000 from our mother in April for medical costs insurance wouldn't cover, And Mom's on a fixed income, Daniel. She shouldn't have given it. And I let her because Vanessa cried on the phone, and I didn't want to be the sister who doesn't trust her own sister. I should have asked more questions. I've been telling myself for months I'm being paranoid. She paused. I don't think I'm being paranoid anymore. I think something's very wrong, and I think you probably already know more than you're telling me. I told her carefully most of what I knew, though I held back the specifics about the letter and the plan for the shower itself, not because I didn't trust her, but because Foster Adams had advised me to keep the exact mechanism of the reveal contained to as few people as possible until Dr. Bott's exam actually happened. Renee didn't push for details. She just said quietly, "Whatever happens, whenever it happens, I'm not on her side of this. I want you to know that now, before it gets ugly, because I think it's about to get very ugly." I didn't know it yet, but Renee Cole was going to keep that promise in a way none of us anticipated, standing up in the middle of my own back lawn 8 days later in front of 60 people, cutting off her own sister mid-sentence to do it. The community's part in this story built up quieter, in smaller pieces, the way real community support usually does, nobody organizing anything, nobody being asked. Walt Feeney, who'd run the fuel dock at our marina for 30 years, and had known Meg since she was a girl helping her father load supply boats, stopped me on the dock the week before the shower and said, apropos of nothing, "Whatever's going on with you lately, Daniel, you've looked like a man carrying a hull full of water for 2 months. You know half this marina would show up for you with shovels if you needed it, right? Just say the word." I told him I appreciated it, and didn't say more than that, because I still didn't fully know yet what shape the trouble would take by the time it broke the surface. But Walt Feeney remembered that conversation. So did 3 other boatyard families who'd known me and Meg for decades. None of them had been told anything specific. All of them, without a single word from me, decided to come to the shower that Saturday instead of the fishing tournament half of them had originally planned to attend, because something in the marina's small, watchful community had quietly decided Daniel Hartley might need people standing nearby that particular weekend. I didn't know it yet, but I was going to need exactly that. The night before the shower, Ethan came by the house one last time, ostensibly to help set up the folding chairs and the tent poles for the tent company delivery scheduled for 6 the next morning. We worked mostly in silence, the way we do best, until the last chair was unfolded and the string lights were tested and glowing warm against the dark water behind the house. He sat down across from me at the same kitchen table, where he'd first told me about the invoice back in April, and for a while neither of us said anything. "You scared?" he finally asked. I told him the truth. I was less scared than I probably should have been, and more tired than I'd been since the year after his mother died. "I keep thinking about the nursery," I told him. "I keep thinking I built a whole room for a child that was never coming, and some part of me is going to have to grieve that tomorrow in front of 60 people, on top of everything else." Ethan reached across the table and put his hand over mine, something we'd done exactly once before, the day I found the shoebox, and he said, "You're not the one who should feel ashamed tomorrow, Dad. Whatever happens out there, you built that nursery because you're a man who still believes in showing up for people. That's not the part of you that failed here. That's the part of you Mom married in the first place." I didn't say anything back. I didn't need to. We sat there a while longer, the string lights humming softly outside the window. And for the first time in 8 months, I let myself believe that whatever broke apart on that lawn the next day, I wasn't going to be standing there alone when it happened. I didn't know it yet, but I was right about that, more right than I understood. Because the next afternoon, when Dr. Priya Bhatt walked across my back lawn carrying a portable ultrasound case disguised as a gift bag, smiling for the cameras like any other invited guest, everything I'd spent 6 weeks quietly building was finally about to come apart in front of the one audience. Marcus Reed's careful plan had never once accounted for everyone who actually loved me. The morning of the shower came in soft and gray, the kind of Chesapeake morning where the water looks like hammered pewter until the sun finally breaks through around 10. By noon, it had burned off into one of those late summer days that make you understand why people fall in love with this bay in the first place. Warm without being heavy, the marsh grass gold at the edges, gulls working the flats behind the house. 60 people filled our back lawn by 2 o'clock. Folding chairs under a rented tent, a table of pale green cupcakes matching the nursery paint I'd rolled onto the walls myself, a banner reading "Welcome, Baby, Hartley" strung between two dock pilings. Vanessa moved through the crowd in a soft gray dress, one hand resting on the curve of her stomach the way she'd done for months, laughing at the right moments, thanking people for gifts, glowing in a way that, even knowing everything I knew by then, still nearly convinced me to doubt myself one more time. That's the thing nobody tells you about a well-built lie. Even after you've read the confession in the liar's own handwriting, some tired, hopeful part of you keeps looking for a reason to believe the performance instead. I didn't know it yet, but Vanessa herself had no idea. Dr. Bott wasn't simply a family friend of Foster Adams's, invited as a courtesy, carrying nothing more dangerous in her gift bag than a keepsake photo frame. That's exactly how we'd planned it. That's exactly how it needed to look, right up until it didn't. Around 3:30, with most of the gifts unwrapped and the cake half-cut, I stood up at the head table with a small microphone Ethan had rigged to a portable speaker, and I did the thing every one of these parties builds toward. I gave a toast. I want you to understand I meant almost every word of it, because a lie doesn't erase 8 months of genuinely wanting something to be true. Most of you know I didn't expect a second chance at any of this, I said, my voice carrying out over the water. I buried my first wife 8 years ago and figured that part of my life was finished. I want to thank everyone here for showing up today to celebrate the fact that it wasn't. A ripple of warm applause. Vanessa smiled up at me, hand on her stomach, eyes bright. And because I know how much this baby already means to this family, I continued, Foster arranged something special today. A friend of his, Dr. Bott, right over there, does these beautiful 3D keepsake scans, and she's offered to do one right now, live, so we can all hear that heartbeat together before the cake's finished. I want to be honest with you about the next 4 seconds, because I've replayed them more times than I can count. Vanessa's smile didn't drop immediately. It held, frozen, for just long enough that anyone who wasn't looking for it might have missed the flicker underneath. The same flicker I'd seen once before, over rockfish, the night she'd talked about Meg's family and I'd told her not to. Then she said too brightly, "Oh, I'm actually feeling really faint. Maybe we should wait. It'll only take a minute," Dr. Bat said, already moving toward her with the calm, unhurried confidence of a woman who has performed this exact procedure thousands of times and has absolutely nothing to prove. I promise, expectant mothers get overwhelmed at these things constantly. Let's just get you comfortable in a chair right here. We'll have it done before the cake's even served. There is a particular silence that happens when 60 people simultaneously realize something is about to go wrong, and none of them yet know what. It isn't loud, it's the opposite of loud. String lights buzzing faintly overhead even in daylight, someone's fork clinking once against a plate, and then stopping, a child 3 tables back, asking her mother in a stage whisper why nobody was talking anymore. The low slap of water against the dock pilings, suddenly the loudest sound on the whole lawn. Vanessa sat down in the chair. Dr. Bott guided her toward, because there was, by then, no version of refusing that wouldn't have looked far more suspicious than complying. Dr. Bott lifted the hem of Vanessa's dress just enough to apply the gel, and I watched my wife's face go through 3 distinct expressions in under 2 seconds: calculation, panic, and finally something I can only describe as surrender. The look of a woman who has run out of moves on a board she thought she'd controlled completely. That's odd," Dr. Bott said, her voice carrying easily across the suddenly silent lawn. Professionally neutral in a way that somehow made it worse. "I'm not getting any fetal readings at all. Mrs. Hartley, when was your last confirmed ultrasound with imaging on file?" Vanessa's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. "I'd like to ask you to come with me to a private area to continue this examination properly," Dr. Bott continued, still perfectly calm. "But I have to tell you, based on what I'm seeing right now on this equipment, there is no pregnancy present in this scan." The room didn't gasp the way you see in movies. It did something quieter and worse. 60 people going almost perfectly still at once. The particular stillness of a hull taking on water below the waterline, invisible from where you're standing but unmistakable to anyone who knows what to listen for. My own sister-in-law's wine bottle, exactly like the first night this story began, tipped and froze mid-pour in her hand. And then Renee Cole stood up. She stood up fast, chair legs scraping loud against the flagstone patio. And she didn't wait for anyone's permission or any polite pause in the conversation. "I want to say something," she said, loud enough that everyone at the back of the tent could hear her. "And I want to say it now, in front of everyone, because I'm done being the sister who stays quiet to keep the peace." She turned to face Vanessa directly, her voice shaking with something that was equal parts grief and fury. "Mom gave you $4,000 in April for medical costs. She's on a fixed income, Vanessa. I let it happen because you're my sister and I love you, and I have spent 5 months telling myself I was being paranoid for doubting you." Her eyes went bright and wet, but her voice never wavered. "Daniel built a nursery with his own hands for a baby that never existed. Whatever you and that lawyer were planning, I'm not part of it. I never wanted to be part of it, and I am so sorry, Daniel, that it took me this long to say so out loud." I hadn't asked Renee to do that. Nobody had scripted it. Nobody had asked her to be the one to stand up first. But something in me broke open a little, hearing my wife's own sister choose, in the most exposed moment of her family's life, to stand on my side of the lawn instead of Vanessa's, not out of loyalty to a stranger, but because the truth had finally outweighed the comfort of staying quiet. Vanessa found her voice then, thin and shaking. You don't understand what actually happened, Daniel, please. Can we just talk about this privately?" "You had 8 months to talk to me privately," I said. "I want to tell you, I shouted it. I didn't. I said it quietly, the way I deliver every survey report I've ever given a boat owner who didn't want to hear what I'd found. Because some truths land harder when they're spoken without volume behind them. You had 8 months, and instead I have a letter, in Marcus Reed's own handwriting, instructing you to, and I'm quoting him directly, wear the belly to the shower, because it would strengthen the custody argument for the trust money." I hadn't planned to say the letter's contents out loud at the shower. Foster Adams had specifically advised against it, worried about complicating any future legal proceedings. But standing there, watching Vanessa's face collapse in front of everyone who'd shown up that day, still believing in the family they thought they were celebrating, I found I couldn't keep it folded up any longer. Some objects are meant to stay private. Some are meant to be read aloud, exactly once, in front of every person deserving of hearing the truth at the same moment. I took the letter out of my jacket pocket. I'd been carrying it since that morning, though I hadn't fully decided until that exact second that I was going to use it, and I read Marcus Reed's words aloud, slow and clear, into a microphone that carried them across still water to 60 people who would each remember this exact moment for years. "I think you actually love him a little, the old man, and that scares me more than the guardianship filing does. Don't get soft on me now." Somebody near the back of the tent, I never found out who, made a small, involuntary sound, half gasp, half sob. Vanessa was crying by then, real tears. Though I've learned enough by now to no longer trust myself, to read the difference between real grief and grief for what's about to be lost. She didn't deny the letter. She couldn't. Her whole face had already told everyone on that lawn the answer before her mouth caught up to it. It was Ethan's granddaughter, my grandniece, technically, Renee's 7-year-old daughter Maya, who'd been sitting cross-legged near the cupcake table this entire time, half watching cartoons on her mother's phone and half watching the adults. Who spoke next, in the small, clear, unfiltered voice only children seem able to use in a room full of adults performing composure they don't feel. "Wait," Maya said, loud enough that half the tent turned toward her. "So there's no baby at all? Not even a little bit of one?" Nobody answered her right away. Adults, it turns out, are far worse than children at simply asking the question everyone actually wants to know the answer to. "No, sweetheart," I finally said, crouching down slightly so I was closer to her eye level, my voice cracking in a way I made no attempt to hide by that point. "There's no baby." Maya considered this with the grave seriousness only a 7-year-old can bring to genuinely enormous news. That's really sad, she said finally. Because you were being so nice about it, you even made the crib. She paused, tilting her head. Is it still bad to lie if you're doing it for money instead of just to be mean? I have given a lot of survey reports in 26 years. I have delivered a lot of hard, unwelcome truths to grown men standing on their own docks. Nothing in that entire career prepared me for a 7-year-old girl asking, with complete sincerity, whether the size of the reason changes the size of the lie. I told her, as steadily as I could manage, no, it's not better because of the reason. It's actually worse because it means somebody planned it out on purpose, for a long time, instead of it just slipping out by accident. Maya nodded slowly, like she was filing that away for later use, and went back to her cartoon, apparently satisfied, leaving 60 adults standing in a stunned half-circle, having just been handed the entire moral center of the afternoon by a girl who'd barely finished 2nd grade. What happened over the next 20 minutes happened fast, the way I imagine a hull finally goes under once the flooding passes a certain point, not gradually anymore, but all at once. Foster Adams, who had quietly positioned himself near the back of the tent with a folder of his own, stepped forward and informed Vanessa, in front of witnesses, that the guardianship petition Marcus Reed had drafted 11 months earlier had, that very week, been formally withdrawn from the county probate court's filing queue at Foster's request, because Foster, anticipating exactly this outcome, had spent the previous month quietly working with a colleague on the probate court's clerical staff to intercept it before it could be officially entered. Marcus Reed, it turned out, had been so confident in the plan's timeline that he'd filed the petition nearly ready to go, needing only a confirmed birth date to activate, and Foster's early intervention meant the entire legal mechanism Marcus had spent 11 months building collapsed the same week it was meant to succeed. And Marcus Reed himself, I learned only 2 days later from Foster's own investigator, had been served that same Saturday afternoon, not at the shower, but simultaneously at his downtown Baltimore office, with a formal complaint filed with the Maryland State Bar's disciplinary board, built from the same letter I'd read aloud on my own lawn, alleging conspiracy to commit financial fraud against a minor's trust. 2 dominoes, falling within hours of each other, though neither Vanessa nor Marcus had any way of knowing, standing in their separate rooms that Saturday, that the other one was collapsing at the exact same moment. Vanessa left the shower that afternoon in Renee's car, not mine, the 2 sisters not speaking a single word to each other the entire drive, according to what Renee told me weeks later. I never saw Vanessa in person again after that day. Everything that followed, the divorce filing, the criminal complaint for insurance fraud tied to Dr. Kessler's falsified charts, the eventual plea deal that kept her out of prison in exchange for restitution and 5 years of probation, happened through lawyers, through documents, through a legal process that took the better part of a year to fully resolve. Marcus Reed lost his license to practice law in Maryland 11 months later, following a bar disciplinary hearing, where the letter I'd read aloud on my own back lawn was entered into evidence exactly as written. I want to tell you the story ends there, with the villains falling and the hero left standing on his lawn in quiet triumph. That's not quite honest, though, and I promised you the truth of how I lived this, not the neatened-up version. Because what came after the collapse wasn't triumph. It was grief, strange and unexpected, for 8 months of a life I genuinely believed in, and it took most of that autumn before I could walk past the nursery door without my chest tightening. The second thing that happened, the thing I think mattered more than any courtroom outcome, happened 6 weeks after the shower, on a gray Sunday in late September, almost exactly a year after Ethan had first told me about the $600 invoice. I was in the garage, taking the crib apart, board by board, planning to donate the wood to a boatyard family who'd just had twins and couldn't afford new furniture. Ethan found me there, sat down on an overturned bucket without being asked, and started handing me screws as I removed them, the way he used to when he was 10 years old, helping me refinish a runabout. We worked in silence for a long time. Then he said, You know Mom would be proud of how you handled this. Not the finding out part. The part where you still read that whole letter out loud, instead of just quietly filing paperwork and disappearing from the whole thing. I told him I wasn't sure pride was the right word for how I felt about any of it. Ethan shook his head. I don't mean proud like it worked out perfectly. I mean proud like you're a man who spent his whole career telling people the truth about what they're standing on, even when it's the last thing they want to hear. You did that to yourself too, eventually. Most people don't. He paused, turning a screw over in his fingers. I used to think being strong meant not needing anybody. Watching you this year, I don't think that's it at all. I think being strong is letting people see exactly how much something cost you, instead of pretending it didn't. I didn't say anything back for a while. Then I put down the screwdriver, and for the second time in a year, my son and I hugged in a garage that smelled like cedar and sawdust, holding on longer than either of us usually allowed ourselves. And I understood, standing there, that whatever I'd lost that year, I hadn't lost the thing that had always mattered most. Renee Cole and I still talk most weeks. An unlikely friendship built out of the wreckage of a marriage that hurt us both in different ways. Walt Feeney and half a dozen Marina families showed up unasked the weekend after the shower, with 2 trucks and no questions, and helped me haul the nursery furniture out to donate it, working in the same quiet, unbothered way they'd have helped haul a boat out of the water after a hurricane, not because anyone asked them to, but because that's simply what people who've known you 30 years do when the water's rising in your house. I still survey boats. I probably always will, until my knees finally give out on the docks the way they've been threatening to for years. But I noticed something different in the work now, something I didn't fully understand before that autumn. When I climb into a bilge with a flashlight and a moisture meter, I'm not just looking for rot anymore. I'm reminding myself every single time that the surface of anything, a hull, a marriage, a smile across a dinner table, was never designed to tell you the whole truth on its own. You have to be willing to look underneath it, even when some part of you would rather not know what you'll find there. Maya still asks me sometimes, when Renee brings her by the boatyard, whether it's still bad to lie if the reason is big enough. I tell her the same thing every time, because I think it's the truest thing I learned that whole year. Truer than anything I could put in a survey report. It was never about the size of the reason. It was about a man who spent his whole life reading what's underneath the paint, finally learning to trust that same discipline at his own kitchen table, and a family battered but still standing, who showed up anyway, once the truth finally had somewhere honest to land. I painted over the sage green nursery walls myself, that October plain white, and turned the room into a proper workshop for teaching Maya how to sand a hull the way I once taught Ethan. Some rooms, it turns out, don't need to stay memorials to what almost was. They just need someone patient enough to build something true in their place.